This episode is brought to you in partnership with Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary. CBTS is a confessional Reformed Baptist seminary which provides affordable online theological education to help the church in its calling to train faithful men for the gospel ministry. They are fully accredited by the Association of Reformed Theological Seminaries. You can learn more about them at their website, cbtseminary.org.
The Covenant Podcast exists to equip listeners with theological content from a 1689 Baptist perspective.
We pray you find this resource edifying, faithful to Scripture, and Christ exalting. Now, let's get started. Welcome to the Covenant Podcast. It's just me without my co-host, Jimothy Johnson. So just me by myself here today. But I do have the privilege to get to interview Alan Nelson IV. And we are going to be talking about rural church ministry. So welcome to the podcast, Alan.
It's great to be here, Austin. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. So to get us jump started, can you tell us a little bit about the church that you are currently serving in? Perhaps you want to give some information about it, perhaps its size, area, denominational affiliation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I pastor, and some people joke about the name, but we are called Second Baptist Church of Perryville, and we're a Southern Baptist church. I've pastored here for 4 years. Well, just over 4 years now, and I'm actually in my hometown, so that may even throw a little. This isn't the church that I was saved and baptized in, but I've been here. You know, this church has been around for, let's see, next year will be 25 years. So we're here in our hometown. The town itself is about 1,500 people, and we're in a county that is just over 10,000 people. So our whole county has 10,000 people, and we're in the county seat of our county, and it has 1,500 people. So we are we're really rural, as rural can get, really, in Arkansas. And so we're a Southern Baptist church. We're a smaller church. We probably, now the COVID numbers throw things off, but I was going to say before COVID, we average in the 60s or so. But recently, I would say our numbers have been, around half or something, maybe a little more than half, just depending, kind of doing some social distancing things. But anyway, that kind of gives you a side. We're a Southern Baptist church, and so we are affiliated with the Arkansas Baptist State Convention and the Southern Baptist Convention. So I think that answered all that, did it?
Yeah. So thank you for that. And so you mentioned you serve in a rural church. Have you always served in a rural church? Is this the first church you've served in?
So I've been in ministry, of at least vocational ministry, since 2006,
Okay.
and it's always been in a rural context. We lived for a year in Kentucky. I was going to school at Southern, and I was a youth pastor there. But I was outside of Louisville in a little community, or in a little town called Taylorsville, but even outside that town, in a little community known as Waterford, and it was pretty rural. The biggest town, I guess, I pastored at a church in Clinton, Arkansas, and I think Clinton is around 3,500 people. And then my first church I actually pastored at was in DeWitt, Arkansas, and I think its population was around 3,500. So probably, from most people's standards, those are all rural contexts.
Yeah. All right. Well, now that we know a little bit more about you and the churches that you've served in, we're excited to glean some of your thoughts about ministering in a rural church. So let's start with preaching, proclaiming God's word. How is preaching to a congregation in a rural community different than perhaps other ministry contexts? More specifically, what challenges do you face as a pastor ministering in a rural church, specifically in the pulpit? And then once you've answered that, what joys are received from preaching to a rural church?
Yeah, in one sense, I've had the opportunity to preach, in different contexts and all that. In one sense, I would say preaching is preaching, and so I think that's something that we all want to remember, is that preaching is preaching, no matter if you're preaching to 2 people or 2,000 people, or if you're preaching, in the jungles, or in an established church, or in a urban context or rural context. On one level, preaching is preaching. At the same time, you're right. There can be some unique challenges, I guess, and one of the things is, I think a lot of the way Jesus talks in the Gospels is almost, can be anyway, more relatable sometimes in a in a rural context, because that's kind of who we are. I mean, we're obviously not an agrarian society, but we plant gardens, and I'm not a gardener, but the people here plant gardens, and they farm, and they raise cattle, and they have horses. I mean, it's just all, it's a rural life. So, I don't know really experientially what I would say the challenges are. It's just always, it's just trying to bring the truth of God's word to this context, and so making sure, I think there's some truth that maybe blue collar and white collar type people maybe think a little differently, and we're, for the most part, we're a blue collar type place. That's what rural Arkansas is. People work in construction, or they work in there's a paper mill not far from where we're at, and so that's the kind of jobs. And so you want to preach in such a way that's understandable. I think the temptation for some rural church pastors, and I know, I'm sure I've been tempted this way too, is to preach to people who aren't here, or to preach to a congregation that you don't have, or some a big city, but that's not who you are. You're preaching to these people, and they need to hear the truth. And I'm a big proponent of taking the gospel to cities. Don't misunderstand me, but from my experience, and maybe you would say the same. I mean, the rural America needs the gospel too, and so I think this is a harvest here, a mission field, and people in churches in these places need quality pastors to preach to them. So, do you have any thoughts or feedback on that, or anything?
Yeah, with something that you just brought up, ministering in rural America, and I think that this is something that you spoke on the last time we had you in the on the podcast, is that both of us have ministered primarily in the Bible Belt. What challenges do you think, as you preach, you experience as a pastor, knowing that you are ministering in the Bible Belt, where perhaps cultural Christianity around you is very prevalent?
Yeah, that's good, brother. One of the things is so difficult, I think, about the Bible Belt is there's so many, quote unquote, you understand how I'm saying this, good people. And what I mean is there's those folks that, if you were stranded somewhere at 3 a.m. and in a storm, and you had a flat tire, you could call them, and they'd come help you or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're regenerate. I mean, they've just, the South is just a different place, culturally conditioned to be polite, and chivalry is. I'm not going to say that it's alive and well in the South. It's certainly not, but more so than in other places. Just a kind of a code of conduct, and the way that you treat one another, and the way that a man maybe treats a woman, and those sorts of things. But the challenge is that can give us a superiority, like a moral superiority complex, and we can look around and we can think, well, we're better than another demographic, we're better than another location in the United States. And the truth is, we're not. We need to be born again. And so there's so many people that profess to be believers, but they have no real interest in the things of Christ, in the Bible, in really where it's really prevalent is in functional members of the local church. So that's a big challenge here, and you don't want to just preach to people as though they are lost, but you also want to keep in mind that some of the people perhaps you're preaching to have professed to be a believer, but they're not regenerate.
Yeah. Yeah. And then lastly on this question, what are the joys that you receive feeding your people continually God's word?
Let me talk about some spiritual joys, and then I'll talk about some fleshly joys as well. But spiritually speaking, it is, and I'm sure this is anywhere. I'm sure this is an urban context as well. But it's just great to be connected, to be involved in the rural setting. Everybody's right here, and so I'm involved in people's lives. When I coach sports and when I volunteer on the local sports board that we have, youth board that we have here in town. So it's amazing just to be involved in my people's lives so easily. Like I don't really have to work that hard to just be where our people are at. And so that's an amazing thing, and it's a joy to see them grow, and it's a joy to see them learn. It's a joy to see them, to sit under the preaching of God's word with an eagerness. And then I would add fleshly joys is in a rural context. Sometimes people bring you vegetables from their garden, and sometimes, look, I had a deacon last year, or maybe it was a year for 1 year, called me and he showed up to my house with a cooler of deer meat, and not long ago, people gave us some squash and some cucumbers, and they're always just giving us, little gifts here or there, just super kind. And it's a great there's a culture of how a church should relate to its pastor, and I think that it's a good thing. And I'm not saying it's not in an urban context. I'm sure it certainly can be, but I do know it's here, and so that's an encouraging, that's a joy to pastor a people like that.
Well, I have had the privilege to listen to you preach online, and very grateful for your faithful preaching example. Many people can't see our video call that we have going on right now, but Brother Allen has a poster on the back of his wall that says Keruxon Ton Logon, preach the word. So I'm thankful for you as you preach the word, brother. But let's move this conversation along from preaching to perhaps ruling and leading decisions that have to be made as a pastor of a rural church. What difficulties or things do you go through that perhaps other Christians or other pastors that aren't in a rural congregation or rural church that they haven't considered that you go through?
Yeah, this hasn't been so much so here at Perryville Second Baptist, but one of the things that can be an issue in rural churches is just the singular pastor model, and that's what we are here. And I said before I came here, I talked to him about plurality of elders, and that's just something that it's just been a slow process. We've talked about it a little bit, but there's kind of been some more pressing things, and so that can really be a challenge. Here we have 4 deacons at our church, and we have a great relationship, and we really, I feel like, encourage each other, and so I don't really have that much of an issue here, but I have ran into problems before where nobody understands really who's the leader, and so the idea is, people, I've said along before, unfortunately, some people in rural churches, they want a preacher, they don't want a pastor. So they want someone to come and preach on Sundays, and it's okay even if he, quote unquote, steps on their toes, but don't pastor them, don't get in their way, don't get in their lives, and that sort of thing. And I have at other churches have had some really difficult experiences with that, not understanding the function of a church. And part of that I'll put on pastors, because when you come to a rural church and you stay for 18 months and then you leave, and then so in the course of 10 years they have 5 or 6 pastors, it's natural for the people to trust other leaders in the congregation that are there. And why should they trust you? Because you're going to be gone in a year and a half or 2 years or whatever. And so that's something that can definitely be a challenge with leadership.
Perhaps you don't have to address this specifically. This could be generalized, but and I have never experienced this either, but I've heard of many pastors in small rural congregations that have to delve into the politics of the community based upon people with certain last names. Do you think that this is common in rural churches?
I think it can be. I think I have had, a little bit of experience with that, but the thing about a rural church is, I don't want to say that it's like it's not necessarily written out anywhere, certainly not written out anywhere, and no one might even actually verbalize it, but there's a suspicion, if you will, of outsiders, because you have this close knit community and everybody kind of knows everybody, even for generations. And so if you don't know Bob over here, you know his grandparents, and so that kind of gives Bob credibility. What happens is, in rural churches, a pastor moves in and you don't know him, and so I think he's got to get to know families. And I've heard stories, I haven't done this, but I've heard stories of pastors tripping up on talking about this person with someone else, and it's like, hey, that's my brother-in-law or whatever, like didn't know, but I haven't had that problem. But I think it's difficult to pastor. What you say about families and the political aspect, it can be difficult to pastor in a rural church because of that. And it can take someone maybe 5 or 10 years before they even begin to gain credibility. I think something that's the Lord's blessed us with here is that I mentioned at the beginning of the show that I graduated from this town. And so I'm kind of an insider, but my family moved here when I was in first grade. So I kind of got the best of both worlds. I'm not like a full insider, but I have been here long enough that I feel like I've developed relationships and trust with people, that it's not just, hey, who's this guy coming out here, telling us how to live or whatever. So, and my wife is from this community, like generationally. So that helps as well. So for me, that's a help. And, I haven't had to run into the political aspect, but I know it's out there and I've seen it and I've heard stories in rural churches that it can be even within the church. These two families get mad at each other.
Right.
But Paul had that in Philippi. I think about how he entreats Euodias and Syntyche. Agree. If that happened in the New Testament under Paul's leadership, we can be certain that it can still happen today.
Right. Good thoughts. And thank you for that. We've talked about some of your preaching experiences and joys and challenges, and the same thing for making ruling and leadership decisions as a pastor. And one thing that I know that you are passionate about is writing for God's glory for the church. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the book projects you're working on?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. It's good to talk about them, because I've been working in 2020 on 2 projects. One, I was encouraged. So I'm preaching through Genesis 1 through 11 right now. And a couple of church members encouraged me, you ought to put this in book format. And I was like, whoa, so I began and I realized I was going to have to just do the first 3 chapters of Genesis, and so it's like 100,000 word manuscript right now. But it's that, to put that in comparison, that's twice as long as Before the Throne, which is my longest book. So it's a pretty big project. And then so on Wednesday nights, of all things, on Wednesday nights when COVID had happened and we dismissed Wednesday nights and I was just preaching online on Wednesday nights, I did a series on regeneration, and so I'm actually working on finishing a manuscript on regeneration as well. Basically, it'll be like From Death to Life, diving in. Chapter 4, From Death to Life, is called A Change of Heart. And so basically I'm diving into chapter 4, From Death to Life, and expanding it and making it a single book, just to work through and think through monergism and its practical implications, like why it matters. It's not just like something for us to discuss over coffee, but it actually matters practically. So really it's going to be a 3-part book. First part, this is what regeneration is. The second part, this is why it matters. And the third part, I'm actually going to include 4 sermons: a sermon from Benjamin Keach, a sermon from George Whitefield, a sermon from Jonathan Edwards, and a sermon from Charles Spurgeon on regeneration. So that's what I'm working on right now. And I found in both of these projects, they've been an overflow of preaching and teaching. And I found that that's brought a lot more joy, I think, probably because of the timing issue. It's not like, hey, I'm going to preach on this over here, and then I'm going to go write about this over here. But I've kind of been able to wed those two things. And I've found a lot of joy in these 2 projects. And I don't know, Lord willing, brother, maybe the end of this year I'll have them out. So we'll see.
So you've mentioned what you're working on right now, and kind of mixing this with your experiences of ministering in rural churches. How has your writing ministry been shaped by what you have experienced as a rural church pastor?
Yeah, a lot of my writing, all of my writing, technically, is from the perspective of a rural church pastor, and so a lot of the illustrations I have, and a lot of the life experiences I have in the ministry are directly from the rural church. Now, I think there's obviously some application across the board, but there are some things, I guess, that I see that I hope is offering a unique perspective. I mean, From Death to Life, for just a quick example, From Death to Life is really like what we talked about earlier. It's born out of, a desire to see people truly born again, truly be Christians, not just saying a prayer or whatever, but truly understand how salvation works. And so, and then, Before the Throne was similar. And that is, I want people to see who God is. And from my experience, again, it comes to that cultural type Christianity where some people just check the box, but they aren't in awe of the holiness and wonder of our great God. So yeah, definitely everything I write really is going to have that rural church pastor flavor, for better, for worse, that it is what it is. At least they can't hear my accent when they read. That's not the same for your podcast listeners.
Well, this next part certainly has some overlap, and I'm sure you just addressed it right now. But what are your goals as you write in the churches that you minister in?
Yeah, when I write, at first I didn't know how this would come across, but people have complimented, and so I feel very encouraged by that. Before the Throne exists only because of people encouraging about From Death to Life, and so the way that I write, I try to write toward the person sitting in the pew. I try to balance depth. I think people should learn. You can't come at rural church folks and say, well, we're just y'all just aren't smart enough or whatever. Of course, yes, they are, and you think about their children are learning big words in chemistry, and biology. So we can learn big words too. So I'll try to balance, depth and also relatability and talking to, and trying to connect to the person in the pew. Unfortunately, for too many people, and I think this is to our detriment, too many people don't understand theological jargon. And I don't mean that we just, spout off words to act like we're smart. But I mean, there are certain words, for example, propitiation comes to mind, that the average pew sitter should know, even though they don't use that word perhaps in everyday conversation. There's some words that they should know. So I write with the goal of connecting and also educating and growing those who are in the pew. And obviously, it's not just for people in rural churches, but that's who I have first and foremost. I think about, when I'm writing, I think about our church and I think about my kids. And I know that's kind of silly, but I don't expect my kids to read it, but I hope one day they will. And that kind of a motivation in my writing as well. And so the overarching goal, I know it's silly, or cliche, I should say, not silly, but kind of cliche. The overarching goal, though, really is the glory of God. And I hope that the Lord will be pleased to use these books, just in any way he will. And so that's the feedback I've gotten has really motivated me to just, keep going.
Well, as we've talked about your writing projects and your preaching ministry, you seem to have had success and support as a pastor theologian serving in God's rural churches. And such is not always the case in rural churches. Some rural churches have a sense of anti-intellectualism or anti-theological content being produced. So what encouragement or instructions would you give to a pastor that is trying to shape their church ministry with a biblical theological foundation rather than a pragmatic one of just doing what works to get people to come to church?
Yeah. Oh man, I could say, because I've been in places where you preach the Bible and it feels like your church is shrinking, and you look around and you see other people doing other things that you don't think they should be doing, pragmatic sort of things, and they seem to be growing, and I've spent those mornings, on the floor pleading with the Lord, why please just let the gospel work, and just show forth your glory in the preaching of the gospel. And so I guess one thing I would say is to my brother pastors, I'm right there with you. I'm by no means an expert, and no one's ever going to write or ask me to come speak at a big conference about how to grow your church real fast or whatever, because that's not what we're doing here. But I would say to my fellow pastors, you don't have an option on whether or not you're going to be a pastor theologian. That's what God has called you to be. And even if you chose to go the pragmatic route, you're still, let the hearer understand, a pastor theologian. The problem is you're just being a really bad theologian. So my encouragement is to stick to it and to preach. There's different philosophies out there about this, but preach expositionally. And I don't mind preaching long expositional series. But I know some have an issue with it. But like right now, we're on Genesis 1 through 11, and we're on week 52. I'm not saying there's a one size fits all. I'm saying be wise with your people. But preach through books of the Bible and just show them your love for the Bible. Talk about it. And one of the things, this advice was given to me by a pastor friend: meet with your men and just read the Bible with them. Right now we meet on Thursday mornings with some of our older men. I try to meet once a month with some of our younger men. That doesn't always happen, but meet separately at times when you can, and just pour forth, because theology is going to be, has to be derived from the scriptures. And you'll get your people to love theology quicker through the scriptures than you will to just say, hey, let me just throw out these words every now and then. But show them from the scriptures theology. That's what I've found anyway. And I think that is people who are genuinely believers, they love the scriptures. And so they may have a hard time sometimes with some of these big words. Start with the scriptures, then work into these theological concepts, and just keep going. And because at the end of the day, it's at the end of the day, you're going to stand before the Lord one day and give an account. And so just know that you are called to be a pastor theologian. And I've had the emails, not here, praise God, but I've had the emails and the phone calls. People call me and say, you need to preach 20-minute sermons. And people email me and show me studies and say, only 20 minutes. People can only endure 20 minutes. And I've been profoundly discouraged by that kind of stuff before in my life. But thankfully, the Lord didn't let me quit. And so I just say, don't quit. Keep going. Seek, if you're a pastor and you're trying to do these things and you're discouraged, please reach out, because there are so many brothers out there that are willing, I know, to help you. Even brothers you think, well, they would never respond to me. Reach out to them and just see, because we've all been there. And I still get discouraged sometimes, but at the end of the day, that's our calling. So get in the pulpit, open the Bible, and be the pastor theologian that God has called you to be.
Amen. Amen. Well, we have two more questions, and this one's piggybacking off of the last one.
Yeah.
This could be especially relevant for the Southern Baptist churches that both you and I minister in. Many people, when they look at big EVA or mega churches, or even large Southern Baptist churches, they think that the numerical size of a congregation automatically equals success. And I know that we could do a whole nother podcast right now about what makes a successful and healthy church. But with the time that you want to spend on this biblically, what is a successful and a healthy church?
Well, that's I want to be careful, because I think we can go the opposite and say automatically if it's a big church, they're wrong, but right. That's not true, and a healthy church. One of my friends in the ministry is Jeff Johnson. He's from Conway, Arkansas, which is just down the road, and they have a saying in their church. It's called "Known for the Gospel." You walk into their church and you see that, "Known for the Gospel." Well, that's a good start for what makes a healthy church, and that is what is your church known for? It's not for the demographic. It's not for the music. It's not for a particular program or whatever. Your church is known for the gospel. So a healthy church needs to be ordered rightly, needs to have a healthy understanding of membership. That can be difficult. That's something we're working through here. We've been working through for the 4 years here. But a healthy understanding of membership, a healthy understanding of the preaching, and then a healthy understanding of what the church is. It's a body of committed believers. There should be no such thing as halfway members or whatever, or non-active members. That's the word I'm looking for. And then the church should be known for the gospel. What you get if you come here at Prairieville Second Baptist Church is my hope. What you come here for is Christ. I'm not opposed to having a ministry for children. We try to do that. A ministry for senior adults. We try to do those sorts of things. But all of that is pointing to it's Christ. That's the draw here. We want to be known for the gospel as well, though that's not written anywhere in our church. That's sort of the mentality you have. We want to be known for the gospel. So a healthy church needs to preach the gospel and to be ordered, rightly. Obviously, we could talk forever about, the ordinances and all those sorts of things. But this is, I guess I just kind of stake my flag there that a healthy church has to have the gospel at its center and the preaching of the gospel as its mission. So anything I can clarify on that, I don't know. That's kind of.
No, I think I know what you mean by that. I think you're very clear that the gospel needs to be focused and centralized in all that the church does to be a healthy and a successful church. My last question for you, as we have been talking about rural church ministry, what final encouragements would you give to either a young pastor, an old pastor, a middle-aged pastor, any pastor that pastors in a rural church ministry context?
Yeah. Things can be discouraging, but I would, it doesn't matter what context you're pastoring in. Pastoral ministry can just be discouraging. But I would say to those in the ministry, you know what you're to do, and so keep doing it. One thing I would say is rural churches have got to stop being stepping stones. It's not wrong to leave a church, okay? However, if you're a pastor, it's possible one of the reasons you're discouraged is because none of the big churches are looking at you or whatever. Maybe you're sending out your resumes and you're discouraged. Nobody's looking at you. Think about how blessed you are for just a moment that you get to pastor Christ Church. Like, what a calling it is. Like, you don't deserve that. You deserve way, way worse than the fact that you get to stand in a pulpit and preach to herald the unsearchable riches of Christ and his gospel. So sometimes we can get discouraged because we get to thinking that, I guess maybe as we say in a rural church, your britches are a little too big, right? You get to thinking that you're a little bigger than you are. So remind yourself of the gospel in the sense of God has called you, God has chosen you, God has equipped you to pastor his people. And don't take that lightly. Be grateful for the church that you have instead of looking down the road for a new church or whatever. And then the other thing I said is kind of back to what I said earlier. Regardless of what other churches may be doing, you know what you're called to do. So keep doing that and keep pressing on, knowing who you will have to answer to. And then, of course, the encouragement I said earlier, I'd say this again, there's a camaraderie sometimes between pastors. So don't be afraid to reach out. And preferably, it's great, like I kind of mentioned earlier, reaching out online. But also, you might be surprised if you do a little digging around that there's some like-minded brothers that are closer to you than you thought. And make a point to meet with them because there's things that you can talk to them about and pray with them about and share with them that you can't even talk to anyone else about. Like for example, even my own wife, I can share with her things, but there are things that when I share with another pastor that we can relate to that. Like my wife, she'll encourage me, and she's a wonderful pastor's wife, but there are things that even with her, it's difficult to share and for her to understand. And so I encourage you, don't go this alone, because that can be one of the toughest things. You need someone sometimes just to text frustrations to, or whatever, or prayer request or whatever. So those are some things that have really benefited me, I guess, over the last few years.
Well, Alan, I thank you for taking this amount of time to talk about this important topic, and I'm thankful for you and the ministry context that you're serving in, and thankful for your willingness to join us. So thank you for today for coming on.
Well, Austin, it's a privilege, brother, to be invited on, and I hope the Lord will just use some of our conversation to encourage and challenge other brothers out there.
Amen. Well, and to our listeners, grace and peace to you.
For additional content, check out our blog ministry at covenantconfessions.com. Also, keep up with our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Next, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. Lastly, thank you for listening to the Covenant Podcast. Grace and peace to you.